Hindustan Academy of Law, law trainers for corporate sector. Hindustan Academy of Law is the pioneer law firm offering training programs exclusively on legal subjects relevant to various industries in corporate sector. Hindustan Academy of Law was set up in the year 1997 with the object of imparting legal trainings to corporate and industrial sector in a most efficient, cost-effective and time-bound manner. Hindustan Academy of Law conducts its first live webinar on legal impact of COVID-19 pandemic on existing contracts.
Good morning, one and all. I am Kamakshi, an advocate and member of Hindustan Academy of Law. On behalf of Hindustan Academy of Law, I extend my warm welcome to you all to the webinar conducted on the topic Legal Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic on the Existing Contracts. Hindustan Academy of Law is a training-based law firm which offers training on exclusively legal subjects to various industries and corporate sectors. Apart from legal training, the advocates that have are very experienced in handling litigations and have thorough domain knowledge on arbitrations and have conducted many arbitrations. Hindustan Academy of Law was set up in 1997. Today among us are three eminent speakers who would be dealing with all the aspects relating to our today's topic. Shri V. Kalyana Ramarao, our chief faculty, would be dealing with constitutional background of the contracts. Shri V. Parvathisam would be explaining to us about all the details relating to Section 56 or impossibility of the contracts. Shri A.V.S. Subramaniam sir would brief us about the important judgments relevant to our present topic. I shall introduce the other faculty to you at the appropriate juncture. But first, I would like to introduce our first key speaker, our chief faculty, the founder director of Hindustan Academy of Law, Shri V. Kalyana Ramarao sir. He has 47 years of experience in the legal field. He has 32 years experience as practicing advocate and has 15 years experience as a senior legal executive in various organizations like RBI, NABARD, Steel Authority of India Limited, RINL Vizag Steel, Bhilai Steel Plant, Singareni Congress Company Limited, etc. He has also conducted more than 300 training programs under the banner of Hindustan Academy of Law. He has handled many cases and has conducted many arbitrations to his credit. So now, I cordially invite Kalyana Ramarao sir to start this session. Thank you.
Were not there. The parliament amended the preamble and added socialist and secular. And then we the people resolved to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic and political. The economic justice part is important is relevant for our contracts. And then liberty of thought, belief, expression, faith and worship. We are not much concerned now for that. With that. Equality of status and opportunity. We are very much concerned with that. Equality of status and opportunity. We are very much concerned when we go deeper into subject. And this constitution was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 26th November 1949, what we call as Constitution Day or Law Day. But on that day, very few Citizenship provisions and some more provisions came into effect on that day. But the bulk of the constitution came into force on 26th January 1950. That was a sentimental day for us because on 26th January 1930, the Indians took a vow to have complete independence. And so within 20 years, we could frame our own constitution. And so 26 January, the Republic Day is postponed. So that is how our constitution, bulk of it, came into force on 26th January 1950, which is a national holiday for us. And if you see the words, again, go to first paragraph, there is a word called republic. What is this republic? And how it is different from a non-republic? I tell you, the difference is very much. Assume for a moment that I am a citizen of England. And suppose the English Parliament makes a law, unanimously, one sentence law. Mr. V. Kalyan Ramarao's head should be cut off on 10th August 2020. And the king or queen, as the case may be, signs it. Gazette notification is given. My head will be cut off. No court can stop. But if same thing happens in India, if I am Indian citizen and Indian Parliament makes such law, President signs it, and there is a notification, immediately I can go to High Court and High Court will grant stay. Because for us, the Parliament made law is not supreme. The Constitution is supreme. All laws, L-A-W-S, all laws must be subordinated to the Constitution. Supremacy of the Constitution is there in India. So Republic means rule of law subject to supremacy of the Constitution. And of course, elected head of the nation, that is another feature. And our president is elected by those whom we elect. And so he is elected by us ultimately. So elected head of the nation, rule of law, constitutional supremacy. And the most important thing is, suppose there is a dispute between two parties, where they will go? They have to go to court on. And court has to follow law. Court can't be arbitrary. And so, what is that law court has to follow? Normally we understand law means law made by legislature. But the Constitution of India, under Articles 142 and 141 and 142, gave a different meaning. Can you see Article 141? Law declared by Supreme Court to be binding on all courts, that is the heading. The law declared by Supreme Court shall be binding on all courts within the territory of India. That means the law is made by legislature, but the law is declared by Supreme Court. And that law should be followed everywhere. What is this declaration? That means a number of judgments given by the Supreme Court where they may declare law in several cases. And that is why you see several advocates will go with a number of judgments. In fact, 90% is the interpretation of the Supreme Court, only 10% is what the normal statute law is. And then Article 142, you can see Article 142, and I don't read the entire thing, I can just tell you the substance. Suppose two parties go to Supreme Court, and in order to do justice in that case, they may have to pass a peculiar order, an order which is suitable in that case only, in which case they can pass an order. And that order should be treated as a law so far as that case is concerned. So Article 141 and Article 142. Article 141, the Supreme Court declares a general law. Article 142, the Supreme Court will give a specific order which should be followed in that particular case. In fact, during the lockdown times, the Supreme Court exercised its powers under 142, and they said all over the country, the period of limitation will be automatically extended so far as the lockdown period is concerned. The other speaker would tell you something more. So that's about Article 141 and Article 142. Now let us see the fundamental rights. We have one chapter called Fundamental Rights, Chapter 3. We have another chapter called Directive Principles of State Policy, that is Chapter 4. And the fundamental rights are available to citizens against state. And now, let us see something more about the fundamental rights, Article 13 of the Constitution of India. You see the heading, laws inconsistent with or in derogation of fundamental rights. If a legislature makes any law, parliament or state legislature, if that law is against the fundamental rights, that law is invalid to the extent of violation of fundamental rights. So there can't be a law violating the fundamental rights. No doubt fundamental rights have some exceptions, so exceptions could be there, but law must strictly follow the fundamental rights subject to exceptions. And then Article 13, Clause 2 is more important. Sometimes legislature may not make law, but some rules, some regulations, some notifications, something could be there. So Article 13, Clause 2 says that law includes ordinance, order, bylaw, rule, regulation, notification, custom or usage having the force of law, the territory of India. So law includes everything. Even administrative action is ultimately included in the term law so far as the decisions of Supreme Court are concerned. So state can't do anything which is in violation of fundamental rights. Suppose you are a contractor and you entered into contract with state, then the state is bound by fundamental rights. If you enter into contract with a private party, then the other party is not bound by fundamental rights. But if you enter into contract with state, State is bound by fundamental rights. Let us see what is meant by state. Article 12 of the Constitution, it includes Parliament, it includes state legislature, it includes Government of India, it includes state government, it includes panchayats, municipalities, etc. But the last part is more important. Other authorities within the control of Government of India. It is here there are several judgments of Supreme Court, and one important judgment, Central Inland Water Transport Corporation versus Brojonath Ganguly, 1986. The Supreme Court for the first time said that a government company comes within the expression of state. A government company means any company where government is having 51% shares. And all public sectors come under government company only. In fact, any organization which is controlled by a state government or central government automatically comes within the expression of state. Control means it could be administrative control or it could be financial control, but ultimately the test is control test. And if shares are more than 51%, automatically it is control. So that's about Article 12. If a contractor enters into a contract with a government company, the government company is a state, and the government company has an extra obligation than mere contractual obligations. The extra obligation is not to take any action which is against your fundamental rights. So this is the additional obligation of state, an additional right of a private party. When a private party enters into a contract with a government company, a public sector company like Steel Authority of India or Coal India or Gas Authority of India or Rashtriya Ispat Nigam Limited or Singarani Collieries, any for that matter, any public sector company. Now, let us see about when we say no action can be taken against fundamental rights, what fundamental rights are relevant for us? Article 14 of the Constitution. And if you see Article 14, it is only a simple one. State shall not deny to any person equality before law or equal protection of laws within the territory of India. It simply says that before law all are equal and the laws must be equal to all people. And by itself it does not impose any obligations on government companies. But the way in which the Supreme Court interpreted and laid down law under Article 141 regarding Article 14, that is very interesting. I don't go to all the details, but briefly I'll tell you. There was a case of E.P. Royappa versus State of Tamil Nadu. That was 1974 Supreme Court 555. AAR means All India Report. In this case, in Tamil Nadu, earlier, the practice was for every 5 years, the political party which is in power would be defeated and new party would come. This is the practice for a long time. So once what happened, one political party was defeated, new party came, and the new party immediately transferred the chief secretary. E.P. Royappa was chief secretary, he was transferred. And most of you who are executives, senior executives in public sector may be knowing when managing director or chairman does not like an executive, at the same time there is no any misconduct or anything, then he will be transferred and he will be given a post. You know what is that post? Officer on Special Duty, OSD. He will be kept vacant. No important files will be sent there. And then the other party, normally he is vexed and he may resign and go, or he may commit some misconduct. So OSD is almost like a punishment post, unless of course really special, really there may be some officers who are on special duty, but mostly it is known that OSD is a penalty post. Here, Chief Secretary was the top post in the state and he was transferred to OSD. And that he questioned in the Supreme Court, first High Court, and then matter went up to Supreme Court. And the lawyer in Supreme Court, a wonderful lawyer, he argued that any arbitrary action, ARBITARY, any arbitrary action presupposes discrimination. Yes, Supreme Court agreed for that. If anything is discriminatory, it is opposite to equality. Fundamental right of equality is violated. Yes, Supreme Court agreed. So any arbitrary action is a violation of fundamental rights. But then Supreme Court asked the advocate, what is meant by arbitrary action? He said, if any action is unreasonable, it is arbitrary. Yes, Supreme Court agreed. So, if any action is unreasonable, it is arbitrary. If it is arbitrary, it is discriminatory. If it is discriminatory, it is violation of Article 14 fundamental right. State can't violate fundamental right. And suppose the order is with reason, but reason is unreasonable, then that is arbitrary. Sometimes no reason is given and then action is taken against the other party. When no reason is given, it is more unreasonable. So that is also violation of Article 14. For instance, in public sector appointments, there would be a clause. Every confirmed person, employee, can be terminated by giving 3 months notice or 3 months pay without giving any reason. Even today you find in the service rules of public sector this particular clause, a nonsensical clause. Supreme Court already said that no person can be terminated without giving a reason. Because if no reason is given, it is unreasonable. If it is unreasonable, it is arbitrary. If it is arbitrary, it is discriminatory. If it is discriminatory, it is a violation of Article 14. So, even in contracts also, when you enter into a contract with a public sector company, the public sector company cannot act unreasonably. This obligation is in addition to your contractual obligations. Okay, let us see another article. Article 21 of the Constitution. No person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. So two words are used, life or liberty. These two can't be taken away except according to procedure established by law. That means if procedure established by law is followed, life can be taken away or liberty can be taken away, but without following the procedure, no life or liberty can be taken away. But then Supreme Court again wonderfully interpreted this law. Firstly, they said that life does not mean a mere physical life. It includes dignified life. It includes means of life. So, if a contractor enters into a contract with public sector company and if his contract is terminated unreasonably, then what would happen? His means of life was taken away. So Article 21 is violated. So here Article 21 and Article 14 both are clubbed together. If something is unreasonable, it is violation of Article 14. And because it takes away the means of life, then Article 21 is violated. And a question came. Suppose procedure established by law is followed, but then the procedure is unreasonable. Can we question the unreasonableness of procedure before the Supreme Court, stating that if it is unreasonable, it is arbitrary, if it is arbitrary, it is discriminatory, if it is discriminatory, violation of Article 14, and so any unreasonable procedure prescribed by law is a violation of fundamental right. Can we take that plea? Let me tell you, long time back, A.K. Gopalan case. A.K. Gopalan was Marxist MP. At that time, there was no Kerala. And in 1950, a 5-judge bench ruled that the procedure established by law, reasonableness cannot be questioned. We presume if Parliament makes procedure, it is a reasonable procedure only, we don't question. Actually, that was a case where he was taken under preventive detention and no opportunity is given to him to explain his conduct. Then he challenged, stating that procedure is unreasonable. The Supreme Court said, no, we can't interfere. We presume that procedure is reasonable. So that was the case of 5 judges, A.K. Gopalan case. But subsequently, Maneka Gandhi case came. Maneka Gandhi, at that time, she was not a BJP member. 1978 means by that time Sanjay Gandhi was also alive. And Janata Party government was against Maneka Gandhi. Her passport was impounded without giving an opportunity to her. When she challenged, stating that my liberty is taken away by impounding passport, I can't go to foreign country, my liberty is taken away. The government pleaded that we have followed the procedure. Then Maneka Gandhi's advocate argued that procedure is unreasonable. Then the government advocate argued that unreasonableness of procedure cannot be questioned. A.K. Gopalan case is there. Then Maneka Gandhi's counsel argued that A.K. Gopalan was wrongly decided. So, a 7-judge bench was constituted by the Supreme Court to see whether A.K. Gopalan case was rightly decided or wrongly decided. And the 7-judge bench case overruled A.K. Gopalan and made a new rule. They said that procedure established by law also can be questioned if it is unreasonable. Because if it is unreasonable, ultimately it is violation of Article 14. Article 21 and Article 14 must be read together. And we have borrowed this from American Constitution. American Constitution just says due process of law. We say procedure established by law. And Supreme Court says now there is no any difference. Procedure established by law means due process of law only. Reasonableness of law, reasonableness of procedure can be questioned. Now let us see how it is relevant for us. You are a contractor, and the contract says that the service of contractor can be terminated by the employer without giving any reason, by giving a notice or without giving any reason. Suppose one day suddenly a letter comes from public sector company terminating the contract, saying that under such and such a clause I terminate the contract, I need not give you reason. Now let us see what is the effect of it. The Supreme Court held that principles of natural justice are a part of Article 21. This is a very, very important development of law. Principles of natural justice are part of Article 21. If principles of natural justice are not followed, then the procedure is unreasonable. If procedure is unreasonable, it is a violation of Article 14 and then Article 21 ultimately. So what are the principles of natural justice? Actually, there are several principles, but broadly two are relevant for us. Adi alteram partem. Adi. Adi means listen. Alteram, alternative. Partem, party. Listen the alternative party. Don't impose any punishment or don't take any action which causes loss to other party without listening the other party. This is also called as no one shall be condemned unheard. That is why in disciplinary inquiries, etc., a charge sheet will be given, explanation will be taken, and then a lot of procedure will be followed. So, opportunity to be heard should be given. That is what is adi alteram partem. The second one is nemo judex in suva causa. It is also another version is there. Nemo judex in propria causa. Both are one and the same. That means in your own cause you can't be a judge. You are likely to be biased. A possibility of bias is there. Bias would vitiate the principles of natural justice. It would be unreasonable. Suppose there is a contract where it is stated that in case of all the disputes between the contractor and the company, the decision of the managing director is final. Then, after all, managing director is a party to the contract and he is likely to be biased. So there is a possibility of bias and this clause is invalid. So these two are the principles of natural justice. Every contractor should be heard, and if there is a dispute, unbiased person only should take it. Unbiased means if there is a likelihood of bias, then that person is ineligible. Sometimes, suppose I am the judge and my son's case comes before me. I am not judging my own case, but in reality, my son's case is my own case only. My wife's case is my own case only. My brother's case is my own case only. Or sometimes my enemy's case comes before me and I want always to give judgment against him. So there also there is a prejudice. Either love or enmity, both will cause prejudice. And most importantly, official prejudice. That means when once an officer takes a particular stand, he would like to remain on the stand. This is ego problem. And in offices, sometimes if a note is there and GM or MD takes a decision, later on he would not like to change the decision. So that is called official bias. And so officers of the other organization also cannot judge in case of dispute between two parties. So this is the scope of principles of natural justice. And if principles of natural justice are violated, then Article 21 is violated and the procedure will be unreasonable. So Article 14 also is violated. So that is the scope of fundamental rights, and no government company can act against the principles of natural justice. No government company can be unreasonable. If they are unreasonable or they act against the principles of natural justice, then the whole action will be treated as invalid, being against fundamental rights. I will give just one illustration for unreasonableness. In one of the organizations I worked, there is a clause, there is a supply contract, supply of refractories to blast furnace. Refractories means bricks. Supply of refractories to black furnace. And the contract says that the quality must be 10%. Then this is the rate per ton. And if the quality is 90, then the rate is little below. If the quality is 80, little below. If the quality is 75%, little below. But if it is below 75%, the employer will reject the material. Okay, fine. Till this, it is okay. But there is another clause which says that in case the employer uses the material, even though the quality is below 75%, then the contractor will be given 1 rupee per lot. That lot may be 40 tons, 50 tons, 100 tons, but for entire 100 tons, 1 rupee will be given. This is the clause. Let me tell you, this is example for unreasonableness. Even though contractor agreed for that clause, still it is unreasonable. When the government company uses the material, when there is no loss to them, giving a rupee simply because the contractor agreed for it, this clause is unreasonable, and hence it is a violation of Article 14, and the court will hold the contractual clause as invalid when it goes to High Court or Supreme Court. Fortunately, the case I am telling, it was compromised, and so there was no any problem. So this is example of unreasonableness. Secondly, from whose point of view reasonableness has to be seen? This is another one. Suppose public sector and a contractor both enter into a contract. Something happens. From contractor's point of view, it is unreasonable for him. From public sector point of view, it is reasonable for them. Then the court has to decide, and how they decide. I'll just give you one example. I don't go to case details and all. There was a case where tenders are invited for purchasing material to be sold by a public sector company or the state. So when state sells the material, they want highest price. Then tenders were submitted. One person became a highest bidder. Normally, if he is highest bidder, he expects contract will be awarded to him. There is a legitimate expectation, and the doctrine of legitimate expectation says that it should be given, unless of course we cancel the entire tender. The government can cancel the entire tender, but if they want to give, they have to give the highest bidder only. And it so happened in that particular case, the government is not in a position to cancel the contract tender because the material will be spoiled if we again go for tender. And the highest bidder is far below the estimated price. They are expecting some price, and highest bidder quoted much low. So what to do? If you again go for tender, it will be spoiled. If you now sell it, there will be a loss. So what they did, they called all the tenderers for negotiation. They also called the highest bidder. And they told the highest bidder, sit and listen. We will negotiate with the remaining persons. We will announce your price. And then if somebody gives a higher price, then that higher price will be offered to you, and if you agree, you will be given. Otherwise, the higher price, highest bidder will be given. Then he protested. He immediately gave a letter stating that I am protesting, and yet he was there in the meeting. Then there was a free negotiation. Practically, it is a bidding only. And ultimately, the government company got very good price, much beyond their estimated price. Then they asked the earlier highest bidder, do you give this much of price? Then he said, no, I don't give this much of price. The whole thing is illegal. That's all. The matter went to court. First, the matter went to High Court. The High Court said that it is unreasonable for state. The contractor is entitled for the contract being the highest bidder. Doctrine of legitimate expectation holds good. You may cancel the tender, but if you don't want to cancel the tender, doctrine of legitimate expectation holds good. If you don't give to him, it is unreasonable and violation of Article 14. Then the matter went to Supreme Court. From Andhra Pradesh High Court, the matter went to Supreme Court. When the matter went to Supreme Court, the Supreme Court lawyer argued that look here, the matter is the material is a material which will be spoiled if we go to free tender. At the same time, we are getting loss. And government means public. A public sector company means public, government means public ultimately. So who will suffer the loss? Public will suffer the loss. Now, by following this procedure, we are getting a lot of profits. That means public is getting a lot of profits. So public interest should prevail over private interest. The contractor's interest should be subordinated to the public interest. Doctrine of public interest should be followed. So the Supreme Court is now pitted with the doctrine of legitimate expectation versus the doctrine of public good or public interest. And ultimately, Supreme Court said that if after negotiations the rise in price is only marginal rise, then give to the original bidder only. But after negotiations, if the rise in price is a substantial price, yes, public sector is entitled for that, because ultimately public will be entitled for public are benefited. So they are balancing the doctrine of legitimate expectation and doctrine of public goods. So that is how concept of reasonableness works out, and ultimately every case will be determined by the court depending on the facts of the case. And ultimately reasonableness means if the matter goes up to Supreme Court, the reasonableness as perceived by the judge, there can't be law. The judge tells whether it is reasonable or not, even though he would like to be objective, subjective element can't be ruled out. And sometimes if another bench is there, a different judgment would have been given, but this particular bench has given a different judgment. This is how it operates so far as reasonableness is concerned. And I think this is the time which we should stop here. My other colleagues will go to the particular law. I only told you the additional constitutional obligations of a public sector company or the government when they are dealing with contracts with private people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kalyana Ramarao sir, for giving us a detailed account of the constitutional background of the contracts. Now, before I invite our next speaker, I once again kindly request you to stay muted. Please do not unmute yourself, and this is just to have a smooth ongoing experience of the webinar. Now, I introduce to you our next speaker, Shri V. Parvatisam, an advocate, senior faculty, and senior partner of the law firm. He has more than 25 years of experience in the legal field. He has been a law officer of Visakhapatnam Port Trust and has worked as DGM Law in RINL Visakhapatnam Steel Plant. He has been associated with the firm right from its inception. So now I cordially invite Parvati sir to start his session. Parvati sir, you may take over.
Thank you, Kamakshi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my dear participants. It is no exaggeration if I say that COVID-19 pandemic has disturbed almost every human activity without any exception. In fact, no human activity is left untouched. The question is how far this had affected the existing contracts. And what do we mean by existing contracts? Friends, there would be numerous contracts in India which were in force at the time when the lockdown, initial period of 40 days lockdown had been imposed. Obviously, every contract would have been, the performance of every contract would have been disturbed. So our short question is how this is to be viewed from the strict legal perspective. Friends, we are aware of several expressions like force majeure, frustration, wish majeure, act of God. How do these firms, these expressions which are in force are to be fit into the Indian context is to be seen. And the word force majeure, there is an interesting thing. The word force majeure is actually a French word meaning superior strength. In fact, its pronunciation is force measure, not measure. So as the word itself denotes, force measure means something beyond the control of either party to the contract has disturbed and stopped the performance of the contract. Now, before we go into the section which deals section 56 which of the Contract Act, which deals with the performance impossibility of performance on Indian Contract Act, one fundamental difference we need to keep in mind, especially between the English law and Indian law. Friends, when English people have ruled us, they have framed Indian Contract Act 1872 for us. Even till date, they don't have a Contract Act in England. Therefore, fundamentally, when a case comes before court, English courts will not be interpreting a statutory provision, whereas Indian courts are bound to interpret a statutory provision. Therefore, in fact, that is the reason why the practice of having a clause in writing, especially with regard to force majeure, had arisen. Even today, the effect of having a clause relating to force majeure is, suppose if you say that strike is a force majeure event and it is written in the contract. A strike may not be otherwise a force majeure event, but if both the parties agree that strike is a force majeure event and it is embedded in the contract, it would amount to frustrating circumstances. On the other hand, suppose a COVID-like circumstances, if both the parties in future agree in the contract that a COVID-like pandemic is not a force majeure, the effect of it is, even if the parties agree, as per Indian law, the frustrating circumstances or this which renders the performance impossible operates automatically. This agreement is not valid. It operates beyond irrespective of the intention of the parties. Now let us have a look at section 56 of the Contract Act, which deals with impossibility of performance. Let us see section 56, agreement to do impossible act. An agreement to do an act impossible in itself is void. Contract to do an act afterwards becoming impossible or unlawful. A contract to do an act which after the contract is made becomes impossible, or by reason of some event which the promisor could not prevent unlawful, becomes void when the act becomes impossible or unlawful. And the third limb says compensation for loss through non-performance of act known to be impossible or unlawful, where one person has promised to do something which he knew or with a reasonable diligence might have known, and which the promisee did not know to be impossible or unlawful. Such a promisor must make compensation to such promisee for any loss which such promisee sustains through the non-performance of the promise. Friends, we have seen the section 56 jargon. The legal jargon would obviously be confusing, but then the scope of impossibility contemplated under section 56 is actually threefold. The first one is the actual an agreement to do an act impossible in itself. Let me give you an illustration. Suppose I promise you that I would bring moon on earth. No individual can bring moon on earth if it is an impossibility act in itself. Therefore, this sort of promise, this sort of act promise in covering impossible performance is covered under section 56. The second type of impossibility contemplated under section 56 is an act, the performance of which is discovered to be impossible. Let me give you an illustration. Suppose I promise to sell my horse, H-O-R-S-E, horse to you, and then you agree to purchase it for ₹1,00,000. Suppose my horse is there in my hometown, and when we make a contract, when we agree to this promise, it is by the time we agree, it is already suppose died. We are both of us are not aware of it. So apparently there is a valid contract, but then later on, after the formation of the contract, it will be discovered that the performance of the sale of horse is incapable of performance as the horse had already died. Therefore, the performance is discovered to be void after the formation of the contract. The third category of impossibility contemplated under section 56 is the contract becoming impossible on account of certain supervening events, supervening impossibility. Let me give you an illustration. Suppose I hire a function hall for performing the marriage of my sister, and the marriage is scheduled on the 1st of September. And apparently this contract is valid for hiring the function. Suppose after formation of this contract and before the scheduled date of marriage, suppose there is a big earthquake and then a hudud-like situation, and then the function hall gets demolished, destroyed totally. And therefore, he no longer, the marriage, the function hall contract, whatever we have agreed, it cannot be performed. It is not available for performance. Therefore, by virtue of occurrence of some supervening event, physical act, physical impossibility, the contract agreed is rendered impossible for fair performance. Not only supervening event, sometimes not only physical impossibility, sometimes the supervening event could be imposed by way of a law. Suppose I enter into a contract with you for import of electronic goods from Japan. This contract appears to be perfectly valid. There is nothing illegal in it. Suppose after the formation of contract, suppose government brings up a law, a ban imposed by way of a legislation, stating that import of electronic goods are prohibited, especially from Japan. Obviously, by virtue of an imposition of law by competent authority, this contract cannot be performed by law. That cannot be performed. This is supervening event imposed by law. Friends, at this juncture, before we go ahead, let us see what is that compensation word, what we have read in the latter part of section 56. Suppose, let me give you an illustration. This is a bigger one. Suppose there is a tourist from a foreign country and I'm a tourist agent. We enter into a contract and he is visiting India for the first time. He asked me and then I promise him, we enter into a contract. I promise him that I would take him to a sea coast and show beach at Jabalpur, which is in the center of India, Madhya Pradesh. Obviously, Jabalpur beach does not arise. I can't bring a sea coast in Jabalpur. But then this I am aware of, whereas the person tourist who is arriving for the first time to India, he doesn't know the location of Jabalpur. He doesn't know whether sea coast exists or not. Therefore, he makes a lot of arrangements and then arrives at Delhi, arrives at Jabalpur. Obviously, I cannot show him. Therefore, this contract for showing the beach at Jabalpur is obviously impossible on my part. But it is not a case of discovery by both the parties, whereas I am aware right from the beginning. Therefore, on account of my promise, if the tourist, suffers any loss, I am liable to compensate him for the loss sustained by him. This is what is the compensation referred to in the latter part of section 56. It's not only this sort of impossibilities. Suppose loss of object. Let me give you a famous example. Long back in the year 1903, there is a popular case called King's Coronation case. A person had hired an apartment, an apartment in England. The king's coronation was supposed to take place a few days ahead, and a king's procession is expected to go through a particular Janpat-like road, main street. So a person had hired an apartment overlooking that road to watch this procession. And subsequently, for some administrative reasons, the king's coronation got postponed or rather cancelled. Therefore, no doubt this contract of hiring this apartment for a few days can still be performed. But the object of hiring this apartment is to watch the procession, is to see the king's procession. It is the object. When that is defeated, obviously the courts have held this sort of impossibility, though physically possible, is when the loss of object is defeated, this sort of impossibility is also covered under section 56 of the Contract Act only. Not only this, now let us see how far commercial loss, LOSS, commercial hardship, can be termed as a frustrating circumstance in law. Friends, let me make it very clear. But in general, mere commercial loss cannot be termed as a frustrating circumstances, excusing the performance and excusing from the liability. Once a promise is made, he is expected to perform the contract. In a commercial contract, making profit is not assured, while normally every person would act for making some profit. So, and suppose the prices go up, even then he is expected to perform the contract, even if he suffers some loss. Failing which, it would amount to breach of contract, and then he is liable for damages. But in rare circumstances, let me give you one illustration. Suppose I agree to supply cement and 1,000 bags of cement at the rate of 100 rupees per bag to you on 1st of September. And after the formation of the contract, suppose the price of the cement, as you know, is a very volatile market, and then there is a possibility of hike. Suppose there is a steep hike, say the price of cement bag becomes from 100 rupees to 2000 rupees. Here, if I'm insisted to perform the supply of contract of cement, practically it would amount to insisting performance of a contract which is not in contemplation of either party. Nobody, even by no reasonable, ordinary, prudent man, can visualize that the extent of price hike would be that much. Therefore, it would be onerous on the part of both parties. Therefore, in such rare circumstances, courts have held that even commercial hardship may amount to frustrating event, thereby excusing the performance. Now let us see, friends, what is the effect where time is essence of the contract. Normally, friends, in contracts, even if we mention in the contract that time is essence of the contract, mere mention is does not make the time essence of the contract. It all depends upon the intention of the parties and the conduct of the parties subsequent to formation. Suppose, assume that there is a contract where time is essence of the contract, and then the performance of the contract is disturbed on account of some frustrating circumstance. In such contract where the performance is disturbed, the promisee, that means to whom the promise is made, he has to specifically give a notice of termination, avoiding the contract. Where time is not the essence of the contract, he cannot avoid the contract. He can only claim damages for the loss, if any, sustained. Now let us see some popular grounds of frustration, what the courts have agreed and held. Suppose destruction of subject matter, non-occurrence of the expected event, death or insolvency where the nature of contract is of personal nature. Suppose I agree to paint a picture, a portrait of yours, and then after painting half of this one, I become too ill that I cannot no longer continue to paint. In such circumstances, my son or my colleague cannot paint that. That personal, it is dependent upon a personal capacity. Therefore, the contract becomes frustrated on account of illness or death. And then at the government imposing legislation or a ban, we have already discussed. And then in war, in occurrence of a war also, the contracts get frustrated. Now let us, and one interesting object is, way back in 1968, with regard to frustration, doctrine of frustration and its application to leases, Supreme Court said, normally, in case of leases, normally leases would be for a huge period, 33 years, 99 years, like that. Therefore, doctrine of frustration would not be applicable to rights and obligations created under Transfer of Property Act. That the Supreme Court had held so in the year 1968. Now, let us see what is the effect of frustration. Friends, as we see, the act of frustrating events should be beyond the control of both the parties. Therefore, the first thing is frustration should not be self-induced. I can't cause certain circumstances and thereby plead that so and so on account of occurrence of so and so circumstances, my performance is delayed or I cannot perform. One more important aspect is, as I have already told, that the effect of frustration, once I make a contract, is whenever these frustrating circumstances occur, they operate automatically irrespective of, independent of intention of the parties. However, the contract becomes void as a result of this one, totally impossible. But then take the example of while the frustrating circumstances put an end to the performance and put an end to the liability on his part, the contract doesn't get exterminated for all practical purposes. What I mean to say, take the example of an arbitration clause contained in a contract. Even if the performance is rendered impossible on account of some frustrating circumstances, till the arbitration clause survives. Suppose there is some disputes, the parties can well litigate between among themselves by virtue of the arbitration clause contained in the same contract. Therefore, it doesn't put an end to the contract for all practical purposes. No doubt for the execution of the contract is not possible. So this is about the effect of frustration. One last aspect is, we have already seen the scope of section 56 till now. The opposite section, that is 65, restitution is contemplated under section 65 of the Indian Contract Act. Restitution is actually adjustment of rights. Let us have a look at section 65. Let me go show you the slide. Section 65, obligation of the person who has received any advantage under void agreement or contract that becomes void. When an agreement is discovered to be void, or when a contract becomes void, any person who has received any advantage under such agreement or contract is bound to restore it and or to make a compensation for it to the person from whom he received it. Friends, section 65. Let me give you an illustration so that to make the position of law clear. Suppose there is a singer, one who sings. She enters, a lady, she enters into a contract with a club owner. The club owner, she agrees to sing consecutively for a period of 3 days in the club on the scheduled day, agreed date of singing. And then club owner, this is actually formation of an valid contract. And then suppose the club owner pays 1,000 rupees advance to this singer. This is actually the receipt of benefit under this contract in advance. Subsequently, suppose this singer on the scheduled date of event becomes too sick and she is cannot, this is a contract of personal nature, therefore she cannot sing. As a result of this, the contract becomes frustrated and then the performance not be done, and then it becomes, the result is the contract becomes void. But then this singer has to return a restitution, return this 1,000 rupees advance, what she had received to the club owner. This is what the section 65 says as an effect of frustration. That is a consequence. Now, let us see. We come to the concluding part of my session. Ultimately, the topic for discussion is what is the legal impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the existing contracts? Friends, my conclusion is it all depends upon the question, the facts of the case. Ultimately, the question to be posed is not only COVID-19, any frustrating circumstances. Are these the circumstances making the performance of the contract impossible? Are these circumstances rendering the performance of the contract impossible? If the answer is in the affirmative, saying yes, then it is a frustrating circumstance, the contract becomes void. If the answer is no, then it is not a frustrating circumstances. But then the answer cannot be answered straight away like a straightjacket formula. It all depends upon the mutual rights agreed on the contract, nature of the contract, whether time is essence of the contract or not. Ultimately, the question to be posed is, are these circumstances upsetting the very foundation, very basis of the contract, and are they going to the root of the contract? So I have taken you some bookish examples throughout this my session. My next speaker would take you to some specific cases decided in the Supreme Court on the issue of impossibility of performance. Thank you very much for patiently listening to me and extending your kind cooperation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Parvati sir, for clearly explaining to us about all the aspects relating to impossibility of contracts. Now, I would like to request our next speaker to come on and take over. But before that, once again, kindly request you all to stay muted. Since we could hear a bit of disturbance in between, I'm just requesting you, please stay muted. Now I introduce to you our next speaker, Shri A.V.S. Subramaniam. He is an advocate presently practicing in the Supreme Court of India. He has more than 20 years of experience in the legal field. He has worked as senior legal executive in various PSUs, including SBI, GAIL, and now he has a high experience of handling litigations as well as arbitrations. He is a senior partner of the firm and has been associated with the firm right from its inception. So, I cordially invite Subramaniam sir to start his session. Sir, you may take over.
Thank you very much, Kamakshi, for the nice introduction. Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen and participants. Thank you so much for your patience, patiently hearing us for the last 1.5 hours. I'll try to quickly wrap it up. There are certain crucial case law pertaining to the aspect of force majeure or the section 56 of the under the section 56 of the Contract Act. These are the landmark decisions of the Supreme Court which I would like to share with you. I would also like to share with you my thoughts and experiences. I would also try to impress upon as to what exactly is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in the present situation and what would be the legal obligations of the contractor vis-a-vis their employer, vis-a-vis their client. To start with, I would like to share Mr. Parvatisham, can you enable the sharing to me? Sorry. One. Yeah. These are the three main case law which I would like to focus upon today on the issue of force majeure or impossibility of performance. The first of being Satyabrata Ghosh versus Munniram Bangur and Company. Satyabrata Ghosh versus Munniram Bangur and Company, AR 1954, Supreme Court, page number 44. This is a constitutional bench judgment, means 5 judges have passed this judgment. The second judgment which I would like to touch upon is Alopi Prasad and Sons versus Union of India, reported in All India Reporter AR 1960, Supreme Court 588. It's a full bench decision. 3 judges have decided. The third judgment is Naihati Jute Mills Limited versus Kyaliram Jagannath. Naihati Jute Mills Limited versus Kyaliram Jagannath, reported in AR 1968, Supreme Court 522. Reported in AR 1968, Supreme Court 522. Now, why these judgments are important? Since Satyabrata Ghosh versus Munniram Bangur and Company, which was reported in AR 1954, Supreme Court 44 page number, the constitutional bench of the Supreme Court has examined the entire scope and ambit of section 56 of the Contract Act and settled the legal position as far as the impossibility of the performance of the contracts is concerned. Now, let me tell you the brief factual background of the case, then we'll go to the specifics of the findings of the Supreme Court in that matter. Munniram Bangur and Company is a Calcutta-based real estate company. This company, in the year 1952, I suppose, in the year 1952, they have started a real estate venture in Calcutta, presently the Salt Lake City of Calcutta. That was the venture which was being developed by Muniram Bhangur Company. They have started a venture there and advertised plots to be sold to various individual purchasers. In that course, Muniram Bhangur and Company promised that they will lay the roads, they will dig the canals, they will provide the electricity, they will provide the water and all other amenities so as to comfort the residents. All these conditions were also part of the agreement of sale which they have initially entered with the individual purchasers. The father of Satyabrata Ghosh was one of the purchasers. When this agreement has entered, he has paid at that time 100 rupees consideration, and the remaining consideration was to be paid at the time of execution of the sale deed. These were the brief terms and conditions. Meanwhile, in the year 1953, by the end of 1953, the government of India, through Ministry of Defense, has taken the land, has acquired the land for limited purpose, requisitioned the land for limited purpose from Muniram Bhangur and Company. The entire layout, they have taken it on the ground that this layout would facilitate the military operations. In the order of the taking over of the land or the relinquishment of the land, relinquishing of the land, they have clearly, requisitioning of the land, they have clearly mentioned that this land would be taken for a limited purpose, for on temporary basis, for the purpose of facilitating the military operations. Now, Satyabrata Ghosh pleaded that the contract has been frustrated and he has offered to refund the sale considerations to all the individual purchasers. The father of Satyabrata Ghosh, contested that the contest of the Muniram Bhangur and Company, that it is a frustration of contract, is not applicable. The matter went up to High Court. High Court said that the English principles of law or the law settled by the English courts on the doctrine of frustration are squarely applicable, and they have treated this case as a frustration. There was a challenge before the Supreme Court. The matter went up to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has laid down 3 primary principles in this judgment, which are still a valid law and which are still being relied by Supreme Court even in the latest judgments. Even in the judgment reported in the year 2017, in one of the Rohington's Nariman's judgment, Justice Nariman judgment, the case was entirely relying on the Satyabrata Ghosh versus Muniram Bhangur and Company. What the Supreme Court decided? The first issue before the Supreme Court is that whether the doctrine of frustration decided by the English courts is mutatis mutandis applicable here, or we have to see the doctrine. This was the first issue. The Supreme Court examined this issue and said that in English court, the doctrine of frustration was a judge-made law because they don't have any codified contract law there. In India, we have a codified contract law, and the impossibilities, all type of impossibilities, whether it is an impossibility at the time of initiation of the contract or whether it is an impossibility supervening, means subsequent impossibility, every type of impossibility is covered under Section 56. The Supreme Court categorically held that the doctrine of frustration is really an aspect or part of law of discharge of contract by reason of supervening impossibility or illegality of the act agreed to be done, and hence would definitely fall within the purview of Section 56 of the contract. The Supreme Court further stated that the view of the High Court that Section 56 of the Contract Act is applicable only to physical impossibility. This was the view taken by the High Court, and the High Court further said that no, we'll rely upon the English courts. So Supreme Court said that the view of the High Court is wrong. Supreme Court held that this is a complete law in itself and said that the principles of English law on the subject of frustration is not applicable here. Even if you have to consider the same, the judgments of the English court as far as the frustration of the contract is concerned, those judgments are only having a persuasive value to decide
to see as to how in this circumstance the English courts have decided. Only to that extent. It has only a persuasive value, but those English court judgments are not bound by the Indian courts, are not binding on the Indian courts. This is the first principle which has been held by the Supreme Court in this case. The second principle is that Supreme Court said that this particular section 56 lays a positive law. It lays a positive law. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean that it lays a positive law? Means that it will not leave to be decided whether the supervening event or the supervening impossibility which is falling upon in the contract would frustrate the contract or not, or whether the parties can agree upon a particular supervening event or not. It is not left to the parties. Even if you agree, even if the parties to a contract agree on a particular event to be a supervening, even a particular event to be a force majeure event, or if they don't agree on a particular event to be a force majeure event, Supreme Court said that even then it would be considered, if that event happens, if the supervening impossibility happens, if that event comes, even if it is not written in the contract or even if it is written in the contract, it would be considered as an event of supervening impossibility and the relief under section 56 can be granted. So it is immaterial whether you are mentioning in your force majeure clause or you have failed or omitted to mention, because ultimately if that event happens, then it would be treated as force majeure. I'll give you an example. Normally we draft for all type of contracts, the major contracts at least, either the project execution contracts or the O&M contracts or the supply contracts, we draft normally a force majeure clause. Lot of time, even I have drafted several contracts, including the international contracts, oil, natural gas purchase contracts. I have drafted a lot of contracts on that time. Normally we mention force majeure, but normally I have not come across, at least, to take an epidemic or a disaster as a force majeure, at least from the international perspective. Indian contracts, I do come across some contracts wherein epidemics or disasters are mentioned as force majeure. Now, suppose in the contract, either in the project execution contract or in the O&M contract, an epidemic or a disaster or a pandemic is not being mentioned specifically as a force majeure event. Then the issue would be whether at all the parties can plead a force majeure or not after the contract gets affected by such epidemic or a disaster or a pandemic. This is the issue. This issue got decided way back in the year 1954. It is not a new issue. It got decided way back in the year 1954 in Satyabrata Ghosh versus Muniram Bangur Company. The court categorically said that even if a ground, act or event of impossibility is agreed or not being agreed between the parties, in case of a subsequent impossibility, if the court finds that the whole purpose or basis of the contract was frustrated by intrusion or by occurrence of an unexpected event or change of circumstance which was beyond the contemplation of the parties at the time when they entered into the contract, the court would certainly interfere to give relief under section 56. So what should be there? Even if the parties write or do not write a specific, or even if the parties contemplate or do not contemplate a specific incident, if that incident or unexpected event or change in circumstance occur, which is beyond the thinking process of the parties, at the time when they have entered into the agreement, the court would give relief under section 56 of the Contract Act. Now, what the courts have to see while giving relief? Here, there is no question of finding out an implied term agreed by or between the parties embodying a provision of discharge, because the parties do not think about the matter, nor at all could possibly have an intention regarding it. So what the courts have to see the courts have to undoubtedly examine the contract and the circumstances under which it is made. The courts have to examine what is that contract. It has to see the nature of the contract. It has to see the circumstances under which a particular contract is being made. Now, in arbitrations, not normally in document-based arbitration, 30% cases we don't go for evidences, but 70% of cases of late we are going for evidences. Now, particularly suppose this type of issue crops up before arbitration or a court, definitely evidence has to be laid, because it has to be seen whether these parties have contemplated reasonable knowledge at the time when they have entered it or not. Okay. So that, and the other thing which has to be seen is that whether even if they have knowledge or they don't have knowledge at the time of whether they contemplated or they did not contemplate, whether this act actually, unexpected event actually hampered the performance or not. So for that, evidence has to be seen. What evidence has to be seen? What evidence has to be taken? The belief, knowledge and intention of the parties are the evidence for this. But court has to form conclusion on the basis of this evidence whether the changed circumstances destroyed altogether the basis of the adventure and the underlying object of the contract. So, taking this evidence into consideration, the arbitrator or the court would examine whether the underlying object of the contract has been destroyed or not, and whether the performance has been destroyed or not. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is a project execution contract. Let us say that one plant has to be installed, one power plant has to be installed to NTPC. NTPC has given a contract to a contractor. He will build, he will supply, everything is there in that. He will supply, he will build, he will erect, he will commission, and then finally give that the completed project to the NTPC. If this is the turnkey contract, if this is given. Now what happens is that, suppose the time for performance of the contract is 4 years from 1/1/2020. Now, suppose there is no force majeure clause in that, or if there is force majeure clause, epidemic or pandemic, either it is mentioned or not mentioned, the force majeure clause doesn't exist. Let us take the example. Then what happens is that in this contract, there is a lockdown imposed on account of force majeure, lockdown imposed on account of the pandemic, COVID pandemic. The lockdown continued from 25th of March to 30th of June till the unlockdown orders came. Therefore, 4 orders of the Ministry of Home Affairs under the provisions of Section 6 of the Disaster Management Act. Now, these orders specifically state that the contractors or any work, any engagement of any labor has been barred except in the essential service. Obviously, construction of project is not an essential service. There are more other essential services which are already defined by the ministry. Now, obviously, for a period of 3 months and 5 days, or for 3 months and 6 days, the work has been hampered. So, in this particular contract, where the period of performance is 4 years, if a party takes an impossibility to perform under this contract, or the party takes the rescue of Section 56 on the ground and pleaded the ground of impossibility of performance under this contract, when the matter would go to the court would obviously see that whether the underlying object of the contract has been destroyed or not, whether the performance would be so destroyed that even if the performance is made, it will not serve any purpose to the NTPC or not. These are the 2 issues which the arbitrator or the court are going to see. Obviously, in a 4-year contract, even if 3 months has been disturbed, the contract, underlying object of the contract is not going to be disturbed. Such being the case, probably in this matter, in this type of example, the rescue or the relief under Section 56 may not be granted to the party pleading force majeure under this contract. In this example, in the contract, in the example. Let me give you another example. Suppose there is a contract for supply of 100 bags of rice for a kitchen to a public sector undertaking. A public sector undertaking is running a kitchen, and they have an event to be performed, and 100 bags of rice have to be supplied by so and so date, by 20th of April 2020. Contract has been entered. Meanwhile, on 25th of March, lockdown has come. On account of the lockdown continued till 30th of June. The transportation was completely shut on account of lockdown. So the contractor is not in a position to supply during the period of lockdown. The lockdown comes to an end on 30th of June, and the 1st of July, the contractor dispatches the load to the public sector undertaking with whom he has a contract. Now, even if that 100 bags of rice is received by the PSU, by that particular undertaking, that serves no purpose. That serves literally no purpose. So when the purpose or underlying object of the contract has gone on account of this force majeure, then the relief under section 56 would be granted. Now, what is the relief under section 56? The relief under section 56, as the other faculty, Mr. Parvatisham, has rightly commented, is to treat the contract as void, and the consequences of section 65 of the Contract Act would automatically come into play. So the essence of this judgment is that each case, each contract has to be examined in the peculiar nature of the facts. Supreme Court in Satyaprata Ghosh versus Muniram Bangur and Company has only laid down the general legal proposition as to what has to be seen by the arbitrators of the court to treat a particular contract as hit by force majeure or has hit by section 56 and to give relief under section 56. But every contract would stand on its own footing. Every contract has to be examined on its own peculiar nature of facts to see whether the performance has been affected on account of the unexpected event of COVID, of the lockdown on account of COVID, or whether the underlying object of the contract has been destroyed or not. So this is the major case law which would be applicable as far as the force majeure on the section 56 plea is concerned. The other is that with regard to whether we can plead commercial hardship, as a ground of impossibility of performance under section 56, and if we can plead, to what extent? This is the other point on which we would focus on the discussion, as this is also equally important, because I come across cases on the ground that the contractors come to us on the plea that, sir, the cost has increased, the cost in the contract has increased to such an extent after the lockdown that it is totally unworkable, whether I have a solution or not. Now there is a time for performance is still there. There is 4 years more time to perform the contract. But in a 10 crore contract, the cost for performance as an additional burden of our cost of performance of the contract by way of the materials to be supplied, or by way of the additional implications, cost implications, or the escalation in prices, are to such an extent that the contract becomes unworkable on account of the increase in cost. So on this point, there is another Supreme Court judgment that is reported in Supreme Court 1960, Supreme Court 588. The second case is LOP Prasad and Sons versus Union of India. The case points out on the fact, before coming to this case, ultimately in Satyaprata Ghosh versus Muniram Bangur and Company, the Supreme Court did not give relief to the party. The Supreme Court held that the hurdle or the impossibility is only temporary in nature, because the government order says that it is only acquired for temporary purpose, it will be given back. So Supreme Court said that there is no time stipulated in your contract for performance. This time is still there, and the acquisition is only for temporary purpose. The moment it comes back to you, you can still sell the lands. So this was the verdict of Supreme Court. Ultimately, relief was not granted by the Supreme Court in Satya Pratap Ghosh. Law was laid down. Now, as far as the commercial hardship is concerned, LOP Prasad versus Union of India, the facts I would like to take in just 10 to 15 seconds. The contract is for supply of ghee to a public sector, to the government of India for its canteens, various canteens. So what had happened is that war came in between. On account of the war, the prices of the ghee have increased, have been escalated. The prices have been escalated, and the party pleaded that I have to be given the additional price, or I should be given the benefit under Section 56 of the contract. The matter went to the arbitrator. Arbitrator has applied equities and said that government has to pay the additional price. This was the verdict of the arbitrator. The matter went up to Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that neither the arbitrator nor the courts in commercial contracts can apply equities. Equities can't be applied in commercial contracts. The second thing is that mere commercial hardship is not the ground to avoid contract. If the contract provides for payment of charges at a rate specified therein, there is an escalation clause in the contract itself. The arbitrators can't ignore the express contracts, terms and conditions, or the express covenants between the parties and award amounts which are not agreed between the parties. They can't be paid. The Supreme Court further held that a contract is not frustrated merely because the circumstances in which it was made are altered. Initially, the price of ghee was 100 rupees. Now it became 110 after the war. A little circumstance has been altered and the price was escalated. The court has no general power to absolve a party from the performance of his part of the contract merely because its performance has become onerous on account of the unforeseen turn of events. Merely onerous nature of performance is not a ground to exempt a party from performance of the obligations under the contract. So now the next question would naturally arise is that what happens? You would ask me that you said that the ghee price was increased only by 10 rupees. What happens if as an originally 100 rupees, 1 kg ghee of 100 rupees is escalated to 200 rupees? There is a 100 price in hike of the ghee. The Supreme Court has also held in this matter that a general legal principle was held in this matter that a wholly abnormal rise or fall in prices, a sudden depreciation of currency and an unexpected obstacle to execution or the like, yet this does not itself affect the bargain they have made if on the other hand a consideration of the terms of the contract, on the other hand the consideration of the terms of the contract in light of circumstances existing when it made shows that they were never agreed to be bound in a fundamentally different situation which has now expectedly emerged. So the essence is that the court said that suppose the price hike is in such a nature, the price hike on occasion of the unexpected event is in such a nature that the parties after the unexpected event were put in such a position which is totally fundamentally different from the original bargain. Nobody would expect that 100 rupees ghee tin would raise up to 200 rupees within a short period of time. This was never contemplated, and there was a war. On account of war, there was a change in price. Their war was the reason. Here we can apply this decision to COVID cases also, the COVID pandemic also. Suppose on account of the COVID pandemic, the prices raised to such an extent that the performance of the contract is totally unworkable. In such a situation, probably the courts or the arbitrator can take a view relying on the decision of Alopi Prasad. Decision of Alopi Prasad. So what has to be seen, that whether there is totally unworkable solution or not, unworkable, whether the contract become totally unworkable or not, fundamentally deviant from the original position. The price hike should be in such a nature that it should be fundamentally deviant from the original position. Let me give you another example. Let me give you another example. Suppose in the year 2000, I hope that many of you from Delhi, even though outside Delhi participants may also be aware that in the year 2018, the minimum wages of in Delhi are being increased, I think in something around 2017 or 18, are increased by 100%. The person, the workman who was drawing a salary of 10,000, suddenly on account of a normal wage revision by the labor department, state labor department, the wages were increased by 100%. So it became 20,000. Now, this situation was never being contemplated by either of the parties, either by the principal employer or by the contractor. This was the contract. In that contract, no person has contemplated this type of wage hike. Normally, the practice is that either it is a state wage or a central wage, the increase is normally 6 to 7%. This is a normal tendency of wage revision. It happens almost every 6 months. Bi-yearly, twice a year, it happens. This was something which was not contemplated. So if this type of wage revision would affect the fundamental, would affect a particular contract and would make the parties in a fundamentally different position, then obviously if this matter is challenged before, if that particular contract is taken up to the arbitrator or the courts, you would get reliefs. Now there is another angle with regard to the force majeure. On account of the force majeure, suppose there are various other new implications, financial implications, which were not existing at that time. Let me give you an example. In some contract, now in almost major of the contracts, probably the instructions of the government are to supply PPE kits, to provide masks, to provide sanitizers, or some other medical equipment with regard to avoiding the infection under the pandemic. Now, many contractors or in many contracts, they have to provide this. This increases the financial burden. Now, there can't be any straitjacket formula to say that whether at all the contractor would be entitled for a renegotiation or not. He may be entitled for renegotiation. A contractor may be entitled for a renegotiation in the contract if the price increase on account of the additional financial burden which was never there earlier. Even for the items which were never there earlier, if the additional financial burden is up to such an extent that it is disturbing the original bargain, then certainly this is a ground for initiation of a fresh bargain in the contracts. Next issue is that in some contracts, the performance may not be impossible, but the performance is surely difficult. Let me give you an example. There is a change in legal position. There is a change in government policy. Earlier, the excise, suppose the excise license has to be taken with certain 5 or 6 type of conditions. If there is a change in policy and the excise license, they mandate it to take with 10 or 12 conditions. The number of conditions increased. The conditions for obtaining a particular license or an approval has become onerous for the contractor. In such event, whether the plea under section 56 can be taken, the rescue under section 56 can be taken, and whether the contract can be avoided or not, was a legal issue which was decided by the Supreme Court in Naihati Jute Mills Limited versus Khaliram Jagannath. Naihati Jute Mills Limited versus Khaliram Jagannath. The Supreme Court, while examining this issue, held that mere difficulty in compliance with making certain government compliances or compliances with certain seeking certain approvals and other things can't be a ground under which can be taken under section 56. If it is we understand that it is difficult, but comply it. What has to be seen is that whether the compliance is totally impossible or not. So whether the compliance is totally impossible or not. Suppose you have to take a particular type of permission or license from Pakistan, which was allowed earlier by virtue of your contractual conditions. You have to supply some material to Pakistan party, or you have to obtain some material from Pakistan party. Government has changed the guidelines. The Pakistan government or the Indian government changed the guidelines, and issuance of that license has been cancelled or kept on hold. Now this is impossible to perform. It is not difficulty, it is the impossibility which has to be seen. So the court in Naihati Jute Mills versus Khaliram Jagannath has categorically held that mere difficulty in performance of the contract, mere difficulty in obtaining certain government licenses, etc., cannot be a ground to avoid performance on a contract, and the rescue under section 56 is not available to such parties. There are few other judgments. I think I am already above my time limits. There are few other judgments which I would like to quickly take to the notice of the participants. Recent judgment on COVID is in Standard Retail Private Limited versus Global Corporation and others. Standard Retail Private Limited versus Global Corporation and others. This is a judgment delivered by the Bombay High Court. It is not the judgment of the Supreme Court. It is a judgment of the Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court, immediately when the lockdown was imposed, the parties, one of the party to the contract has approached the Bombay High Court for appointment of arbitrator, reading that the contract is impossible to perform. The contract is impossible to perform and it should be treated as the void. These are the grounds. He relied on the judgment of the Satyaprata Ghosh and also LOP Prasad case. The Bombay High Court, while examining these judgments, held that these judgments are presently not applicable to your case for the reason that the lockdown, these judgments are not applicable to your case there for the reason that the restriction imposed on lockdown is not applicable to your particular contract. Your particular contract is to make supplies through port. There were no restrictions in the movement of ships through ports during the lockdown. There were no restrictions in the movements of ports during the lockdown. Such being the case, the benefit of these decisions or the benefit of the law under these decisions is not applicable to your case, and they have not granted relief. Another case went again to the Bombay High Court. This time they have gone along with the circular of the Government of India issued in specific reference. The Ministry of Finance has issued a circular saying that in the variety of contracts, in various varieties of contracts, the impact of the period of COVID has to be treated as a force majeure event, subject to what is written in your contract. The Bombay High Court said that those instructions we need not to follow. Those may be an administrative instructions if the government is following and extending your contract, and if the contractor is not having any objection, that is a different story altogether. But the government instructions passed by the Ministry of Finance, those particular instructions are not passed under a specific statute. This is the first thing. The other thing is that even if it is so, a contract has to be examined on its own merits, whether the lockdown has really impacted your contract or not, so as to avoid performance of the contract. So holding that legal position, the Bombay High Court has recently decided the challenge on the COVID also. There are another two judgments in Gujarat Urja Vikas Nigam Limited case and B Energy Limited Energy Watchdog case. Energy Watchdog versus CREC, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, CERC. These two cases are of Supreme Court, one on the year 2017 and the other of the year 2019. In these two cases, sorry, both are of the year 2017. One is of the Kurian Joseph and the other is Justice Rohington. In both the cases, the Supreme Court, both are divisional bench judgments. In both the cases, Supreme Court has relied on its earlier constitutional bench judgment of Satyabrata Ghosh versus Muniram Bhangur and Company. So as on this date, the law is that the law laid down by the Supreme Court in Satyabrata Ghosh versus Muniram Bhangur and Company, LOP Prasad case and Nayati Jute Mills case. This is still a valid and a good law till date. So friends, to conclude, each case, each contract, whether it got affected on account of COVID, has to be examined on individual parameters and individual basis by examining the facts of each contract. There can't be a hard and fast rule that COVID-19 lockdown would automatically operate as a force majeure in each and every contract in India. There is no automatic rule like that. Every contract has to be examined on its own merits. This is the fundamental rule. And what has to be seen? Whether the performance has been destroyed and whether the underlying object of the contract has been destroyed. These two has to be seen from the three judgments which we have discussed now. Thank you so much for your patient hearing and thank you so much for the opportunity you have extended to me for sharing my thoughts on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Subramanian sir. First of all, on behalf of all the participants, I would like to thank our speakers. I would like to thank our Chief Faculty, Shri V. Kalyanarama Rao sir, for his enlightening speech and for his immensely knowledgeable and valuable words. I also thank Parvati sir for his outstanding lecture, and which is highly educative and informative in nature. I thank Lord Subramanian sir for briefing us about the judgments, for throwing light on the important judgments in an effective manner. Now, on behalf of Hindustan Academy of Law, I thank all the participants, each and every participant, for choosing to attend the webinar and bearing with us patiently all through the session. Thank you a lot for extending your kind cooperation, and also thank you for staying muted. But before we take leave, I seek your kind attention to the words displayed on the screen. All your suggestions, feedback, and legal queries, if any, along with relevant facts, may be addressed in writing to hindacademylaw@gmail.com or WhatsApp to 9999226947. Please mention the speaker to whom your question is addressed to. Your question would be answered personally. So, in case if any participant has any legal doubt or any legal query, please feel free to contact us either through mail or through WhatsApp. Moreover, we genuinely seek your valuable suggestions and feedback. So please make it convenient to leave a mail to us or WhatsApp to us. Hindustan Academy of Law hopes to serve you in future as well. Thank you once again. Have a nice day. Thank you all.